The Lightbringer's descent. The weight of the sacred vestments pressed upon Julian's shoulders like the hand of destiny itself. Each step down the spiraling stone staircase made the fabric heavier, as though the robes themselves understood the magnitude of his purpose. The wool, blessed by the high priestess and anointed with oils of warding, had grown thick against his skin, a protective shell hardening with each passing hour of his descent. Good, Julian thought, flexing his fingers inside the heavy gloves. The righteousness of my cause makes me impervious. I am becoming the armor I wear. The labyrinth welcomed him with the patience of centuries. Stone walls pressed close on either side, their surfaces slick with moisture that caught the torchlight in brief, wet gleams. Somewhere far above, Julian could hear the muffled sounds of the village, voices raised in what he imagined were prayers for his success. The sound gave him strength. They were counting on him, the Lightbringer, the chosen one. Tink. A water droplet struck the stone near his foot. Tink, tink. The rhythm was steady, inexorable, like a countdown. Julian's heart answered with its own percussion, the war drum of justice, thundering in his chest with righteous fury. Every beat reminded him of his training, his purpose, the sacred duty that had been revealed to him on his 16th birthday, when the elders had shown him the prophecy. When darkness breeds in depths below, the Lightbringer shall strike the final blow. He had spent 3 years preparing for this moment, 3 years of fasting and meditation, of studying the ancient texts, of learning the 99 names of the abomination that dwelt in the labyrinth's heart. The creature had terrorized the village for generations. Every decade it would emerge from the depths, and the bravest warriors would descend to drive it back. Most never returned. But Julian was different. Julian was chosen, his stomach cramped with hunger, a familiar sensation after 40 days of ascetic preparation. The gnawing emptiness was necessary, the elders had explained. The ritual required a pure vessel, one cleansed of earthly desire. The hunger sharpened his mind, made him focus on the divine purpose rather than base needs. A rat scurried across the passage ahead, its small body a blur of gray fur and desperate motion. Then another. A third. They fled down the corridor in a chittering panic, scrambling over each other in their haste to escape. The abomination is near, Julian thought, gripping his weapon tighter. They sense its presence. Even the lowest creatures know to flee before such evil. The weapon was heavy in his hands, a ceremonial mace of blackened iron, its head inscribed with protective sigils that glowed faintly in the torchlight. It was blunt, designed not to pierce but to consecrate, to deliver the ritual blow that would seal the creature back into the depths for another generation. The weight of it felt right, purposeful. The passage opened into a wider chamber and Julian paused at the threshold. The air here was different, thicker, harder to breathe. His chest labored with each inhalation, and he felt his skin tightening further, the sacred vestments fusing with his flesh in what could only be divine transformation. The gods are preparing me, he thought, making me strong enough to face what lies ahead. The chamber's walls were smooth, almost polished. Julian could see the distorted suggestion of his own form reflected in the dark stone, a heroic silhouette, broad-shouldered and ready. He stood taller, squaring his shoulders. This was the moment he had trained for. Tink, tink, tink. The water's rhythm grew faster, or perhaps that was his heart, the war drum reaching a crescendo. Ahead, the passage narrowed again, twisting deeper into the earth. The torch in Julian's left hand guttered and sparked, casting wild shadows that seemed to writhe with malevolent intent. He whispered a prayer of protection, feeling the words vibrate in his chest like a shield. More rats flooded past him, a river of squeaking terror flowing upward toward the surface. Dozens of them, hundreds, their small eyes reflecting his torchlight in brief flashes of yellow before they disappeared into the darkness behind him. Yes, Julian thought, run, small ones. The Abomination's hour of reckoning approaches. His breathing had become labored, each inhalation requiring conscious effort. The thickening of his skin, the divine armor the gods were granting him, made movement more difficult. His joints felt stiff, his neck rigid. When he turned his head, the motion was slow, ponderous. The weight of destiny, he told himself. The burden of the Lightbringer. The passage began to smell different. Not the clean scent of stone and water, but something organic. Rotten. The stench of the Abomination, no doubt. The texts had described its foulness, the way it befouled everything it touched. Julian breathed through his mouth and pressed forward. The labyrinth opened into a final chamber. It was vast, the ceiling lost in shadow high above. But what caught Julian's attention, what froze him in place, was the walls. They weren't stone. They were glass. Silvered glass, polished to a mirror finish, covering every surface of the chamber. A dozen Julians stood in a dozen reflections, torch flames multiplying into a constellation of fire. The chamber of silvered glass, he realized, his pulse quickening. The texts mentioned this. The final trial before the confrontation. He stepped into the center of the chamber, weapon raised, turning slowly to scan every reflection. The Abomination would be here, somewhere, watching, waiting. He could feel its presence like a pressure against his thoughts. "Show yourself, demon," Julian's voice echoed, bouncing between the mirrors. "I am the Lightbringer. I have come to—" He stopped. In the reflection directly ahead, something moved, not beside his image, not separate from it. The movement was his image, but it was wrong. Julian raised his left hand. The reflection raised its left hand. But where Julian held a torch, the reflection held nothing. No, not nothing. A twisted, gnarled appendage, yellowish and scaled, clutching at empty air. Julian's breath caught. He looked down at his hand, his own hand, with the torch burning bright and clean. When he looked back at the mirror, the appendage remained. Tink, tink, tink. Water struck stone behind him. Julian turned slowly, his stiff neck protesting the motion. Another mirror showed another reflection. This one revealed more. The sacred vestments weren't robes at all. They were skin. Thick, mottled skin, gray-green and warded, hanging in folds across a hunched, malformed body. What he had thought was the weight of ceremonial fabric was the bulk of his own expanding flesh, grown grotesque and swollen. "No," Julian whispered. He turned again, faster now, scanning the circle of mirrors. Each showed a slightly different angle, and each revealed more of the horror. His eyes, he could see them now in the reflection, weren't human. They were large, yellow, with horizontal pupils that contracted in the torchlight. When he blinked in shock, the reflection blinked with him, the same slow descent of a nictitating membrane. The weapon in his hands, in the mirror, it looked different. Not a mace at all, but a crude club, a broken femur wrapped in rotting cloth, the kind of improvised weapon a creature might fashion in the dark. Julian's legs trembled. He looked down at himself, at what he could see of his own body in the dim torchlight. The robes, the gloves, the blessed vestments. But the mirrors didn't lie. Or did they? This is the final test, Julian thought desperately. An illusion. The Abomination is trying to break my faith, to make me doubt. Then he heard the voices, faint, filtering down through the stone from somewhere far above. The villagers. He strained to hear, pressing his ear to the wall. Actually worked this time. Barely. Thought he'd turn around halfway down. The prophecy of the Lightbringer was a nice touch. Very theatrical. Laughter. Tired laughter, the sound of people finishing a long, tedious job. He actually believed it. Spent 3 years preparing. More laughter. Poor bastard. We really must work on new stories. That one is getting thin. How many Lightbringers does that make now? 7? 8? I lose count. Julian's legs gave out. He collapsed to his knees, the impact sending shockwaves through his swollen body. The ceremonial mace, the club, clattered to the stone floor. What? His voice was wrong. Too deep, too wet. What am I? A woman's voice, clearer now. Should we seal the entrance? Give it another hour. Let it settle in down there. Easier when they accept it. Poor creature. Do you think it understands yet? Does it matter? It's contained. That's what counts. Julian crawled toward the nearest mirror, his movements awkward and lurching. His reflection crawled with him, a hunched, monstrous thing, all yellow eyes and mottled flesh, dragging itself across the stone with appendages that were never meant for walking. The hunger in his belly wasn't ascetic fasting. It was the Abomination's hunger. Had always been the Abomination's hunger. The rats hadn't been fleeing from something ahead of him in the labyrinth. They'd been fleeing from him. No, Julian said, but the word came out as a croak, a gurgle. He pressed his face, against the cold mirror, trying to see past the reflection to the human underneath. There was nothing underneath. There had never been anything underneath. The memories crashed over him then, flooding in like water through a broken dam. Not 3 years of training. Decades. Centuries. The same descent over and over, convinced each time that this time was different. This time he was the hero. This time he would save them all. The village needed their monster contained. Every few years, when it grew too restless, too aware, they would sing it a new song, create a new prophecy, give it a new name, Lightbringer, Demon Slayer, Chosen One, and send it back down into the dark to fulfill a destiny that was nothing more than a leash. Above, the voices faded. Julian remained kneeling before the mirror, staring at the thing he had always been, the thing he would always be. Tink. 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 The water counted down to nothing. Somewhere in the darkness, Julian could hear rats returning, growing bolder now that the crisis had passed. They would nest in the labyrinth's upper chambers, and in a few years, when the Abomination grew too restless again, too close to remembering, the villagers would send down another hero, another iteration of himself wrapped in new lies, convinced of new purposes. The chamber of silvered glass reflected the same truth in every direction. A monster, alone in the dark, clutching the tattered remains of a fantasy that had never been real. Julian, the Lightbringer, the Chosen One, the hero, tilted back his head and screamed. The sound echoed through the labyrinth, bouncing off stone and glass, distorting into something that was no longer remotely human. Above, in the village square, the elders heard the echo and nodded to each other with satisfaction. Contained, one said. For now, another agreed. They dispersed into the evening, returning to their homes, their families, their peaceful lives. Far below, in the chamber of silvered glass, the Abomination stared at its reflection and tried desperately to remember the name it had been given this time. Julian? Or had that been the last one? The hunger gnawed, patient and eternal, and the labyrinth waited, as it always had, for the next hero to descend.